The fear came before the feeling. That was how it always began. In Havenport, Maine, people believed fear was useful. It kept things in order. It told you when to stop, when not to cross a line, when to stay loyal to the past. No one said it openly, but everyone felt it when Emma Caldwell walked alone along the harbor each morning. They watched her from cafe windows and parked trucks. A young widow should stay quiet, they thought. She should carry her loss like a rule she could never break. Emma felt their eyes, but she kept walking. The sea was restless that morning, gray waves hitting the rocks like they were trying to speak. Emma pulled her coat tighter and focused on her steps. She had learned how to move through the world without drawing attention. 3 years of grief had taught her that. Her husband, Michael, had died suddenly. A heart failure no one expected. One day he was laughing, the next day he was gone. The town had gathered then. They brought casseroles, kind words, long hugs. They told her she was strong. But strength faded when the doors closed. Now the house was quiet in a way that felt heavy, not peaceful. Every sound echoed. Every night felt too long. Emma had survived by building routines. Morning walks. Work at the local library. Evenings with books she barely remembered reading. She told herself this was enough. Still, something had changed. It started as a small discomfort, like a thought she could not place. A feeling that arrived without warning and left her uneasy. She felt it while pouring coffee. While folding laundry. While standing at the window watching the tide pull back from shore. She did not give it a name. Because naming it would make it real. Emma reached the pier and stopped. Gulls circled overhead, crying loudly. She tossed them crumbs from her pocket. She did this every day, and they recognized her now. They landed close, bold, and impatient. She smiled without meaning to. The smile surprised her. It faded quickly, but the moment stayed with her. She rested her hands on the wooden railing and breathed in the salt air. The sea had always been honest. It did not pretend to be calm when it wasn't. It did not apologize for moving forward. Emma envied that. Behind her, footsteps sounded on the boards. She stiffened. Most mornings she walked alone. A part of her wanted to turn, another part wanted to stay still, like she had been caught doing something wrong. She did not turn. The steps slowed, then stopped a few feet away. Silence stretched between them. Emma felt her heart beat faster, for reasons she did not understand. Finally, the footsteps moved again, passing her, respectful and quiet. A man walked by, hands in his jacket pockets, head slightly down. He did not stare. He did not speak. But as he passed, he glanced at her. It was brief. Gentle. Almost unsure. Emma's breath caught. She hated herself for that reaction. It felt like a betrayal, even though nothing had happened. She told herself it meant nothing. He was a stranger. The town had seen new faces before. Still, she watched him walk away until he reached the end of the pier. Only then did she turn back toward home. At the library later that day, Emma struggled to focus. Words blurred on the page. A child asked for help finding a book, and Emma answered with a smile that felt forced. Her coworker, Linda, studied her with careful eyes. "You okay?" Linda asked. Emma nodded too fast. "Just tired." Linda hesitated, then said nothing more. People in Havenport were good at silence. They believed it was polite. That afternoon, Emma overheard 2 women talking near the front desk. They did not know she was listening. "Did you see the new man by the harbor?" one whispered. "Yes," the other replied. "I heard he moved into the old Harper place." "Poor thing," the first said. "Widower, I think." The word hit Emma harder than she expected. Widower. The women lowered their voices even more. "Well, let's hope he keeps to himself. This town doesn't need trouble." Emma pretended to sort returned books, her hands shaking. Trouble. That night, Emma lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Michael's side of the bed stayed untouched. She had never moved his pillow. She told herself it was respect, not fear. Her mind returned to the pier. To the sound of footsteps. To the brief glance that had made her feel seen in a way she had forgotten. Guilt followed immediately. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes, pressing them shut like that could erase the thought. Outside, the wind picked up. Waves crashed harder against the shore. Nature did not ask permission to continue. Emma whispered into the dark, "I'm not ready." She did not know who she was speaking to. Herself, maybe. Or the memory of the life she had lost. Morning came anyway. When Emma stepped outside the next day, the air felt different. Warmer. Brighter. She walked toward the harbor without thinking about why. Her feet already knew the way. As she reached the pier, she slowed. The man was there again. He stood near the railing, looking out at the sea like it might answer him. He looked tired, but not broken. Like someone still standing after a long storm. Emma stopped a few steps away. This time, he turned first. Their eyes met. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them spoke. But something quiet passed between them, something honest and unafraid. And in that moment, Emma realized the fear she carried was not warning her away. It was warning her that everything was about to change. Daniel Brooks arrived in Havenport quietly, like someone who wanted to stay invisible. The town didn't know much about him, and he didn't volunteer details. People whispered about the new man, the one who rented the old Harper house by the cliffs. He didn't join conversations at the cafe or wave at neighbors. He appeared only in glimpses, repairing a boat at the dock, walking along the pier, or carrying groceries home in the late afternoon sun. He had left Vancouver for reasons no one needed to know. A long illness had taken his wife, and the grief that followed was too heavy to carry alone. Moving to a small town felt like a chance to catch his breath, to exist somewhere quiet. He didn't plan to meet anyone. Not really. But then he saw her. Emma Caldwell. She appeared every morning on the pier, feeding gulls and staring at the sea with a kind of careful patience. The first time Daniel noticed her, she turned her head slightly, and their eyes met. Nothing was said, but the world shifted a little. Daniel felt a pull he hadn't felt in years, something fragile and confusing. He tried to ignore it, telling himself it was nothing more than a fleeting human reaction. He saw her again the next day. She smiled at the gulls, tossing crumbs, hair catching the sunlight. He didn't walk toward her. He didn't speak. But he lingered in the distance, watching, and something in him softened. He remembered small details about life he had forgotten, warmth, curiosity, the tiny beauty of morning routines. The days passed like this. Distance, observation, small hesitations. Each time they crossed paths, Daniel felt that pull grow stronger, unspoken and unsaid. One day, he lingered longer than usual. Emma noticed. Their eyes met for a second longer than before. Daniel gave the smallest nod. A greeting. A recognition. And then he walked on. Emma felt the same tension. She tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it was only loneliness speaking, that she could not open her heart again. Yet every morning, she hoped to see him. She found excuses to linger on the pier, her hands trembling slightly when she caught a glimpse of him in the distance. The town watched her, silently judging, but she ignored it. One afternoon, Daniel walked past her and stopped just a few feet away. The wind ruffled their hair. He finally spoke. "Hi," he said. Her breath caught. Simple, ordinary, and yet it shook her world. "Hi," she replied, her voice small. Daniel smiled faintly. "I've seen you here a few times." "Feeding the gulls." "Yes," she said. Her smile was quiet, hesitant. "There, persistent." He chuckled, a sound she hadn't realized she missed hearing in years. It was warm, easy. They didn't speak about the past. They didn't speak about grief. There was no rush to understand each other fully. They only existed in the moment, observing the waves, sharing small jokes about the stubborn birds. Days turned into weeks. Conversations grew slowly, like a fire catching in wet kindling. They talked about the weather, about the best trails along the cliffs, about books they loved and books they hated. Each word was a step toward understanding, toward trust. Neither mentioned loss directly. It didn't need to be named. They both carried it, silently. One evening, the sky burned pink and orange. Daniel and Emma walked along the pier together, hands brushing against each other in accidental contact. The world felt suspended, holding its breath. "You're quiet," Daniel said. "But not cold." "Quiet in a good way." Emma looked at him, unsure. "I've learned to be careful," she admitted. "People judge you too fast here." "I don't care what they think," Daniel said, and she could hear the truth in his voice. Yet, even as he said it, he didn't reach for her hand. He didn't push the moment. It was a gentle statement, but it left a gap, a question hanging in the air. They began meeting more often. Not every day, but often enough that absence between encounters made each meeting feel urgent, necessary. Emma noticed she started looking forward to their walks, to the way his voice sounded when he spoke without thinking about formality. Daniel noticed the small changes in her posture, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed. Even so, fear lingered. It sat between them like an invisible wall. Not from themselves, both felt the pull, but from the world outside. The town whispered. People stared. Some looked away quickly, but the murmurs existed. Both knew what it meant to be observed. To be judged for daring to smile again, for daring to consider that perhaps love could find them in a town that loved routines more than second chances. One rainy morning, Emma arrived at the pier to find Daniel under the small wooden awning, sheltering from the drizzle. He was holding a notebook, sketching the waves. She didn't speak at first. She just watched him, unsure whether the boldness of her presence was welcome. He looked up and smiled, and everything inside her that had tightened with fear relaxed slightly. "Rain doesn't stop the sea," he said. "And apparently, it doesn't stop the birds either." She laughed softly, shaking off her coat. "I guess not." The moment stretched, fragile and quiet, like a bridge they were both testing. Daniel closed the notebook, his hand hovering near hers, but not touching. They walked together, side by side, letting the conversation flow in safe streams. Words about grief, about loss, about longing, they remained unspoken, but they were there, present in the silence, in the understanding that neither needed to explain everything. By the time the sky cleared, Daniel and Emma felt lighter. Not free from the past, not untouched by pain, but lighter in the shared presence of someone who might understand. Something was growing, small and careful, like green shoots after a long winter. And yet, fear remained. Fear that the town would not forgive them. Fear that love after loss was unnatural, that it would bring gossip, judgment, and disappointment. Fear that their hearts, fragile as they were, might break again. But for the first time in years, neither Emma nor Daniel wanted to turn away. When the sun set, casting long shadows across the harbor, Daniel finally said, "Will you walk with me tomorrow?" Emma nodded, barely breathing. "I'd like that." They parted at the pier, each carrying a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Both understood that the path ahead was uncharted. They knew there would be judgment, whispers, and internal battles. But they also knew that something had begun, a quiet, careful connection that refused to be ignored. And as Emma watched him disappear around the corner, she realized she had stopped trying to tell herself it was wrong. It didn't feel wrong. It felt like possibility. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt the pull of life moving forward, and she let herself lean into it, the town noticed. It was subtle at first, glances over coffee cups, whispers in the grocery aisle, nods that carried judgment. Havenport was small, and small towns were like mirrors that never forgot. When Daniel and Emma began walking together along the pier more often, when they shared quiet laughs and small touches, the town noticed. Emma felt it before Daniel did. She heard the hushed conversations behind her back, the soft sighs when she passed. People were polite enough not to speak directly, but the tension followed her like shadow. The word too soon floated through the air more than once. Too forward, some said. Not proper, others whispered. It stung, though she tried not to show it. She learned to carry judgment like a coat, something heavy but manageable. Still, it made her hesitate. Some mornings, she lingered longer by the window, watching the pier, wondering if she should turn back, disappear, pretend she had never met Daniel. Daniel noticed the change in her too. One evening, they had planned to walk by the harbor, but Emma arrived late, shoulders tight, eyes avoiding his. He sensed the unease and stepped back, unsure how to bridge the invisible gap. "Is everything okay?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Emma shook her head, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. The town's whispers had a way of becoming a presence, a weight that pressed against her chest. She had survived grief. She had managed silence. But now she was navigating something new, something alive, and the world seemed determined to make her doubt it. Daniel understood this. He had lived through it too. The quiet judgment of neighbors, the intrusive curiosity, the way people assumed they knew your story better than you did. He didn't say much, only that he would walk beside her anyway, even if the path was rocky and uncertain. One night, under the soft glow of street lamps, Daniel stopped walking. He turned to her, shoulders tense, hands gripping his coat. "This isn't fair to you," he said, his voice low but firm. I don't want to make this harder." Emma stared at him, unsure what he meant. Her heart beat fast, fear clawing at her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean the town," he said, looking away. "People will talk. They'll assume things. And he paused, swallowed hard, "I don't want to be the reason you feel judged or wronged for living again." Her throat tightened. Daniel's words struck her with the force of truth. She had felt this fear herself, had carried it quietly, believing it was her burden alone. But hearing it spoken aloud, she realized it was mutual, unspoken, heavy, yet unavoidable. "What if they're wrong?" she whispered, barely audible. "What if this is just life continuing?" Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. No hesitation. No guilt. Just honesty. His eyes were steady, like someone reaching across a void and saying, "I will be here, even if the world isn't." Emma wanted to reach for his hand. She wanted to step closer. She wanted to believe that life could feel this gentle again. But the fear of judgment, the fear of moving too quickly, still held her back. They stood there for a long moment, the harbor silent except for the distant waves and gulls returning to roost. Neither moved. Neither spoke. They let the tension stretch, letting the unspoken words hover between them. Finally, Daniel sighed and stepped back, turning toward the pier. "I'll give you space," he said quietly. Emma's heart sank. She watched him walk away, the streetlights casting a long shadow that seemed to stretch into her chest. She wanted to call after him. She wanted to tell him not to leave, that she needed him there. But she only whispered to the wind, "Don't go." Days passed in this fragile state. They continued to meet, but something had shifted. Words were fewer, smiles smaller, laughter muted. Emma noticed the empty feeling when Daniel wasn't nearby, the longing that returned with a sharper edge than before. The town continued to watch, and the whispers never stopped. Each comment felt like a weight, pressing against her chest, reminding her that what she felt was dangerous, unnatural, or improper. One afternoon, she sat on the pier alone, staring at the water. The gulls circled lazily, unaware of human judgments. Emma closed her eyes and let the wind whip around her. She thought about Daniel, about his quiet presence, about the gentle pull that had drawn her out of her grief. She remembered his words, "What if this is just life continuing?" Her chest ached with longing. She realized that fear had been both a prison and a warning. It warned her of pain, yes, but it also reminded her that what she felt mattered, that it was alive and real. She could not let judgment, external or internal, take this away. That evening, she walked to Daniel's house. She found him in the garden, fixing a broken fence, his hands covered in dirt. He looked up, surprised but not displeased. "Emma," he said. "I can't stop thinking," she admitted. "About you. About us. About, whatever this is. I can't let the town tell me how to feel anymore." Daniel's eyes softened. He set down the tools and stepped closer, not touching her, only letting his presence fill the space. "I've been thinking too," he said. "I didn't want to scare you, or pressure you. I didn't want to let go." They stood there in silence, the world around them fading. Judgment, fear, past grief, it all existed, but it did not have power here, not in this moment. Emma realized then that she did not need permission to feel. She did not need to hide her heart to satisfy the town's expectations. What she felt for Daniel was not improper. It was human. It was life insisting itself back into her chest. And Daniel understood the same thing. Yet even as they stood close, the question of the future lingered. Could they withstand the whispers, the judgment, the fear? Could they allow themselves to love openly in a world that had learned to fear what came after loss? The harbor was quiet as night fell. Emma and Daniel remained together, close but not yet touching, hearts beating fast in a shared rhythm. The wind carried a promise, a gentle assurance that fear existed to test them, not to define them. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, both of them knew one truth: what they felt was not wrong. It was not unnatural. It was simply the heart insisting on life, connection, and the possibility of love again. They would face the town. They would face the whispers. But that night, walking back side by side, neither wanted to turn away. The fear had not disappeared. It would never fully vanish. But now, it was no longer the master. It was a reminder. A reminder that love, fragile and uncertain, was worth the risk. And that realization, gentle but unshakable, carried them forward. Spring arrived slowly in Havenport, as if the town itself was waking from a long sleep. The ice had melted along the edges of the harbor, gulls circled with renewed energy, and the sun lingered longer in the sky. Everything felt like a quiet promise of new beginnings. Emma Caldwell stepped outside that morning with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. The cold of winter had passed, leaving warmth and possibility in its place. She didn't know why, but she felt lighter, as if the air itself had lifted the weight she had carried for so long. By the pier, a small envelope rested on the wooden railing near the spot she usually stood. Her name was written in Daniel's neat handwriting. She picked it up with trembling hands, breaking the seal. Inside was a simple note: "Walk with me by the harbor. I'll be waiting." No explanations, no pressure. Just an invitation. Emma smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and started walking toward the pier. Her heart beat fast, a mixture of excitement and nervousness. When she arrived, Daniel was already there. He stood close to the water, hands tucked into his coat pockets, staring at the waves. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he looked up and their eyes met. His presence was familiar and strange at the same time. She felt the pull she had resisted for so long, the quiet, insistent feeling that life had something more to offer. He smiled, faint but full of meaning. "I realized something," he said, voice low, almost lost to the wind. "Nature doesn't stop just because winter was hard. It grows again. Quietly. Honestly. It doesn't wait for permission." Emma's chest tightened. His words struck her with the force of truth. She had spent so long believing that love after loss was unnatural, that it defied rules she could not see but felt in every whispered comment from the town. And yet, here he was, embodying the proof that life continued, that hearts could heal, that love could return without erasing what had been. They walked slowly along the pier, side by side. Neither reached for the other's hand yet, but the closeness was enough. Words came and went, soft and unhurried. They spoke of the ocean, of birds, of small details in life that mattered more than they had thought. Each conversation was a step toward trust, toward understanding, toward the quiet acknowledgement that they belonged here together. Emma looked at him, really looked, and saw the same longing mirrored in his eyes. He was cautious, respectful, aware of the fragile nature of what they were building. But there was hope too. And hope, she realized, was stronger than fear. The town still whispered. People still stared. Some shook their heads when they saw them walking together. But Emma no longer felt the need to hide. She understood now that what they felt was not wrong. It was not improper. It was human. It was the heart doing what it was made to do, beginning again. As they walked, Daniel finally spoke of their pasts, not in detail, not in sorrow, but in acknowledgement. He told her about the long nights alone, about grief that never fully left, about the moments he thought he would never smile again. Emma shared her own memories of Michael, of the grief that had shaped her, of the loneliness that had become a quiet companion. They didn't compete in sorrow, they shared it. And in that sharing, the past became a bridge instead of a wall. By the time they reached the end of the pier, the sun had begun to dip, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The water reflected the colors like glass, still and endless. Emma stopped and turned to Daniel. "I don't want to pretend anymore," she said softly. "I don't want to hide what I feel." He stepped closer, finally closing the small distance between them. Their hands brushed, not by accident, but deliberately, slowly, as if testing the warmth of connection that had been waiting for them all this time. "I don't want that either," he admitted. "I was afraid at first, afraid of judgment, afraid of losing you before we even had a chance. But I've realized something. Love isn't about rules or timing. It's about finding someone to walk with, even when the world doubts you." Emma's eyes welled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope, of surrender to something gentle and true. They stood together in silence, letting the wind and the waves speak for them. The fear that had shadowed them for months remained, but it no longer had power over their choices. The whispers of the town, the judgment, the careful caution, all of it became background noise against the clarity of what was unfolding between them. Slowly, Emma reached for Daniel's hand, entwining her fingers with his. He held her with care, as if this was the most precious thing he had ever touched. They walked together along the pier, letting the moment stretch, unbroken and unhurried. For the first time, Emma understood the truth that had eluded her for so long. What everyone feared, love after loss, opening the heart again, was not unnatural. It was life itself insisting on continuation. It was the heart's way of saying that even after grief, joy could return, fragile but real. Daniel squeezed her hand, a gentle reassurance that he felt the same. They did not need to speak everything aloud. Words were unnecessary when hearts were aligned, when presence alone could communicate the depth of feeling. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the harbor bathed in twilight. Shadows stretched long, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. Emma and Daniel paused, standing close, looking out at the water. They did not rush. They did not force the moment. They let it exist fully, as it should, as it had always been meant to. "Whatever comes," Daniel said softly, "we face it together. Even if the town doesn't understand, even if the world whispers." Emma nodded. Together. And in that quiet affirmation, the weight of fear lifted just enough to let possibility bloom. Not a reckless, hurried bloom, but a patient, enduring one. Love, they realized, did not erase what had been lost, it stood beside it, gentle and true, offering warmth where cold had lingered. The harbor was silent except for the waves, steady and eternal. And as they walked side by side under the emerging stars, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, of hope, and of life moving forward. The path ahead was uncertain. Challenges would come. Some people would still whisper. Some hearts would struggle to accept what they were seeing. But Emma and Daniel understood one truth, quietly but firmly: what they shared was not wrong. It was not unnatural. It was simply love, patiently insisting itself back into their lives. And that night, as they continued their walk, hearts beating in tandem, both of them realized the simple, profound truth: life goes on. Grief does not vanish, memories do not fade, but the heart, fragile, brave, and stubborn, has a way of beginning again. They walked into the night, together, and for the first time in years, the world felt wide, open, and full of possibility.